Welcome. I'm Bruce Starr. I'm the state senator from District 12, which is the bulk of Yamhill and Polk County. We're going to have a series of podcasts in the days ahead where we'll talk about issues that are occurring in the state capitol, issues that are facing our families, businesses, both good and bad. Unfortunately, there's some things that are occurring in the state capitol today that we're trying to stop because they're harmful to our families. And there are some things that we're doing across the street, down the street, that ultimately I think are beneficial. So we're going to, over the course of the next several weeks, we'll have those conversations. Today, I have the opportunity to have a conversation with Wes Butler, someone that I've known for quite some time. Wes and his wife have homeschooled their family over the last 30 plus years, 40 plus years. And we talk about their experience. We talk a little bit about the experience of how the law in Oregon has changed. I encourage you to listen and stay tuned. We're going to have more conversations in the future. So welcome. It's good to see you this morning, Wes, for the inaugural conversations with Bruce Starr.
Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, no, I've obviously known you for a long time and had the opportunity to work together. I think one of the things we want to talk about this morning is kind of your family's experience, your experience as a dad, as somebody who accepted the responsibility, your wife and you, to educate your children rather than delegate that responsibility to others. You've been kind of in this trenches for quite a while. You've seen the how the law has changed over time and the impact that government has had on homeschool families and the changes that have occurred, the maturation to some degree of kind of that whole homeschool environment. So why don't we start just, at some point you and your wife had small children and you made a decision to, rather than send them off to public school or write a check to a private school, you made the decision to educate your kids at home. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. My wife was actually the one with the vision. It was not me. I was preoccupied trying to run a business.
You're trying to make a living.
Trying to make a living, nuts and bolts. And she looked at the two oldest kids were in public school for a short time. And she said, I can do this. And besides, they're not teaching the things that we would like them to learn. Right. In the context.
Right.
So that was about 1988, and we dabbled a little bit in public school at home. Terrible idea. What a waste of time. So by 1991, we were fully, privately home educating our kids, and we went on to have 7 children, and they were all homeschooled.
A quiver full,
absolutely. So,
so in the early days, my sense is, and you're going to tell me, but my early days seems like you probably had to work pretty hard to cobble together maybe the curriculum, whereas today it seems like there's probably a lot more tools available to homeschool families. So talk a little bit about the challenge of even finding the right books and things that you would need in order to educate your 7 kids at home.
It was a little bit more difficult in the around 1970. The whole home education movement was pretty dead. It was missionaries and hippies.
Yeah,
that was pretty much who was doing it. It was a very small percentage of people.
Right.
And of course, we're probably somewhere around 4 or 5 million today.
Right.
So the curriculum was there was very limited.
Right.
And of course, you go to your public library and select whatever you want, but that's something that took time.
Sure.
And so that was very limited in terms of curriculum. That is incredible at this point that it's almost like a bottomless pit of being able to select what you want.
Sure. I mean, in today's world, you got all of the assets of technology, and you got
Right.
most of us have those computer assets in our homes and the ability to basically have the world at your fingertips. That didn't exist 30, 40 years ago.
It did not. So, were you gonna?
Yeah, so let's fast forward a little bit. In your conversation, I think you mentioned when you started, you weren't in Oregon. Obviously, you came to Oregon, I think, in the early '90s, and again, you're homeschooling already. You've got your kids. Tell me a little bit about did you ever call up the public system, say, hey, the Butler family, we're going to homeschool our kids. We're not going to put them on the school bus on Monday morning when the school bus comes along. What was your interaction, I guess, with the public system at that time? There were some pretty significant government regulation about homeschooling families that decided to keep their kids at home when you've got state law that basically said you got to send your kids to school.
Right. So my recollection of 1991, 1992 was that we had to report to the state, to the SDs, every year and tell them what we were doing. The law said we only had to tell them what we were doing, not ask, but we had to test every year.
Right.
Big pressure. Maybe a test on things that we didn't even want our kids to learn.
Sure.
So, and that continues to be a big issue for a lot of people that aren't professional teachers. They wind up being great teachers, but they're not professional teachers. So
Right.
the testing thing and the deadlines becomes a big stress point.
A little bit of
Right.
a stressor on the family and in the middle
Right.
of your teaching. So and I got involved in kind of this policy area because my father got elected to the legislature. My dad started in the Oregon House of Representatives in 1993. In the early 90s, the homeschool environment movement was growing. We had the Parents Education Association, PPAC. Dennis Turi was and probably still is engaged and involved in that. I remember homeschool families coming to the legislature. I remember Dennis and I think Dick Carmen and others that maybe were on the front end of some of those conversations. And I remember, seeing the data. And by then, because of the regulation that had been in place, there were literally years of data that demonstrated that homeschool families were doing not a good job. They were doing a great job.
Right.
And when you compare the data of how homeschool families compare to families that delegate the responsibility, whether it's private school or public school, homeschool families have outperformed their peers time and time and time and time again.
Absolutely. With the whole concept of tutorial teaching, and that could be even in a group. It doesn't have to necessarily be one-on-one. Tutorial teaching is the best method to learn.
Yeah.
And also experiencing life with your parents, could be even your peers, it could be extended family members, could be friends.
Right.
But that it's the whole enchilada that is so good and
Right.
so beneficial.
Yeah.
It's not just Johnny's going to sit in the basement and learn math this year. It's way beyond that, and I could talk for hours about that, and my wife could do another 5 hours.
So you talk a little bit. I mean, Johnny's not in the basement doing math. Is Johnny learning math by a hands-on approach? Is Johnny's dad maybe a carpenter that he's going to work with dad here and there? Not every day, but experiencing why geometry is really, really important if you're trying to cut angles and trying to measure and make things actually come together. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Well, practical application of book learning is always beneficial. It gives it meaning, and lots of kids are bored at school, whatever it is,
Right.
And so I think it just brings all of that to life. It's exciting. It's exciting to see the light bulbs come on, the enthusiasm, and kids are made to learn.
Right.
That's what they're made for. They're not made to sit, maybe lockstep in a dark classroom.
So you have seven kids. I'm sure that they obviously not all the same. I'm sure that they have their own unique personalities, your own characteristics. They probably all didn't learn in the same manner. Talk a little bit about the opportunity to specialize. The curriculum per what best worked for each one of your kids.
So probably the first thing to mention on that would be one of my daughters has a lot of learning disabilities, and being able to spend time with her.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we did everything just right, but she learned to talk, which she couldn't do that.
Wow.
And all kinds of things related to that. And then we had, and of course, my wife is a musician, so all the kids had to learn music and music theory.
Oh, that's great.
Which only enhances
Sure.
all of the other learning.
Right.
It actually stimulates that. So I think that was a really good thing. And then real life experiences. I remember my oldest daughter went on a radio show and was interviewed and talked about her homeschool experience.
Right.
My first son, he got into chickens by the time he was in junior high. So he was ordering chickens, and he knew everything about chickens and what breed did what and what. Anyway, it was a practical application of learning, researching,
Sure.
the whole process.
Right.
You want me to go through the rest of them?
No, you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to, but
Yeah.
no, but because you have the opportunity to individualize each of those, teach your kids, I think makes a big difference as compared to what happens in a more traditional education setting where, it's more or less, and maybe not completely fair, but more or less one size fits all. And each child does have, their own learning styles, and trying to fit kids into, a system that replicates it time and time and time again. Maybe
Right.
it's a little more difficult, and perhaps why we've got a situation where, unfortunately, kids, particularly in Oregon, in the public system, are not doing too well when you compare them to their peers in other states. And that's some of the challenges that we're working on across down the street and around the corner at the Capitol. Let's get back a little bit to the conversation about how the law changed. I know that my dad, as a state rep, worked closely with the homeschool community and introduced legislation. And the legislation, the end goal has always been to free families from government regulation, government control. Right. Those tests that you had to take every year. Mm-hmm. And what happened if a homeschool child didn't do well in those tests? What were the ramifications?
Well, to my knowledge, they could be remanded back to public school if they did really poorly on them. To my knowledge, nobody has ever been remanded back to public school.
But that pressure was always there.
Right.
But the reality is that the homeschool families have done such a fantastic job that doesn't occur. Why? Because homeschool families do a great job.
Right.
And the data speaks for itself. So fast forward to 1999, my dad had run in the 98 election for the state Senate and got elected to the state Senate. I ran in 98 and got elected to his House seat. So I had the opportunity to start serving in the Oregon House of Representatives. My dad was over in the Senate. And we introduced the Homeschool Freedom Bill again. My dad and I, and we had a host of other sponsors. By then, the work had been over really the course of several sessions where we were educating legislators about the success that homeschool families had. And, we, in 1999, the Republicans were in the majority, both in the House and the Senate. And so we were able to get a hearing for the homeschool bill. And we had bipartisan support. I remember specifically Jeff Barker, state representative from Aloha, retired police officer.
Right.
And I remember specifically him being passionate about it and being, as a Democrat, being really ultimately really helpful. And he helped to rally the I think the Democratic side of the aisle. But ultimately, we got momentum on that bill. We had that bill come up for a hearing. Obviously, in the previous sessions, the kind of the professional educating community, the school boards association, the school administrators, they each have their own association, and the teachers union, kind of the trifecta of the professional educators in the building, had always opposed the idea of releasing homeschool families from this kind of heavy hand of government. But there was a point in time when that cracked a little bit during that session. Do you remember that?
I do. I think there was some conversations between some of our people that are want to influence the politics aspect, and there was some conversations between the Oregon Education Association, Education Department, and so on. And I don't understand completely the motivation, but we actually got, in 1999, we got half of what we wanted out of that proposed bill.
Right.
And it wasn't ideal, of course, but we were glad to have the victory.
Yeah, so that bill, I remember what happened is that we negotiated. Actually, I believe that the bill as it passed the House was really, really strong, and we had a strong bipartisan vote. I know that ultimately the School Boards Association, I believe, kind of took the lead in the professional, what I call the professional educators in the building, that trifecta, in supporting changing homeschool law. And because we had such a strong vote coming out of the House, I remember that the governor's education staffer at the time, his name was Danny Santos, came knocking on my door and said, "Hey, we want to work with you on this." And when that happened, it really opened it up. So we knew that we had the opportunity then, and that's where we basically got to where the law is today, where homeschool families test at grades 3, 5, 8, and 10. Correct.
Correct.
So instead of every year, you still have to test, but it's it's just those 4 times.
So there is another aspect to that. Unless they're asked by an ESD, school district, for their test results, the tests are not required to be turned in unless they're asked for them, and very few ask for them,
Right.
quite frankly.
Yeah.
And so the testing almost feels like it's for naught.
Yeah.
I mean, why would I go to all this effort if they're not going to make me turn in the test?
Right.
So the other thing that changed in '99 is we only had to report as we started homeschooling a particular child, and of course at that time it was age 7 as opposed to age 6 now. We were required to only do that one time.
Right.
And that was wonderful, not have to worry about that every year.
Right.
So that's part of what happened in '99.
Yeah, you refreshed my memory on it.
Yeah.
So a big win. John Kitzhaber was the governor, and Governor Kitzhaber signed that bill.
Yes.
We felt pretty good about that.
Yes.
And then but we weren't done. And so in 2001 session, again got reelected to the House of Representatives, and we came back again for what I would call the full enchilada. Let's go. We made the first step in '99. Let's finish the job and get to homeschool freedom, where we don't have to test at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now I'm thinking, was that in 2001 or 2003? Might have been 3.
It all blends together. Probably 2003. I think
it was 3.
we've come back every single
Yep.
full session with the freedom, what we call the Freedom Bill.
Yep.
It's basically freedom to privately train your children.
Right.
It's
Imagine that.
It's just amazing.
How government lets you raise your children the way that you believe is the right way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe it was 2003 because Ted Kulongowski was the governor.
That's correct.
And so again, because of the work that homeschool families had done, we had to have done and accommodated the new law that was passed in '99. We came back with the Freedom Bill again in 2003. By then, I was in the Senate, and we ultimately got that bill passed again with strong bipartisan vote, complete freedom. And again, my good friend Representative Jeff Barker in the House was extraordinarily helpful, and got it through the process. And probably close to the end of the session because what happens at the end of the session, you pass a bunch of bills and they end up on the governor's desk, and he or she has time to address those bills at the end of the session. I believe it's 30 days they have from sine die to when they need to sign a bill.
Right.
But I remember session was over. It was in the summer. I'm in my living room. I think it was a Saturday afternoon. And my phone rings, and I could tell it was the governor, and I was like, "Oh, the governor's calling me." And so Governor Kulongowski calls me to inform me that he's going to veto the Homeschool Freedom Bill. And I had a brief conversation with him to try to persuade him otherwise, but ultimately was not persuasive enough, and the governor did veto that bill. Extraordinarily frustrating for all of us that had put in the work to get that bill passed.
That's right.
And that's kind of where the law stands today and the process stands. That was
Correct.
2003, and here we are sitting here in 2025.
It's
20,
it's amazing.
20 years later, and homeschool families continue to do extraordinary good work.
Absolutely.
We just had Apple Pie Day last week, and Apple Pie Day for those that are watching is when the homeschool families come to the Capitol, have a rally celebrating their success, deliver pies to each of the legislative offices, and talk about, again, the success that the homeschool families have had. And I was privileged to have the opportunity to talk at the rally. The interesting thing there is, again, because I've been involved in this conversation for so long, to see the second generations of homeschool families in that crowd. I'm sure your kids are going to follow in your and your wife's footsteps, and other families who have invested in, had their parents invest in their lives, are now investing in their children's lives. So it's kind of fun to watch.
Well, I have 18 of my 21 grandchildren are being homeschooled today.
That's fantastic.
So we're just excited about that.
Yeah.
Just tickled.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about this morning. Kind of talk a little bit about the history. Are there any advice that you would have for families that are contemplating taking their kids maybe out of a more formal education environment and bringing them home and educating them at home? Do you have any thoughts that you would share with folks that are watching this that are concerned perhaps about what's being taught in the public system, or the values that are being instilled or not instilled?
Well, it's what comes to mind. Several things come to mind. There's a verse in the book of Luke that Jesus is talking about a child becoming like his teacher. So I think all parents need to ask who their child's teacher is. It could be curriculum, it could be technology, it could be TV, it could be all kinds of things. It could also be negative peer influence, and a teacher that is teaching, a professional teacher teaching things that you don't want them to know. So I would put that out as a challenge, that you need to know what your children are being taught, because parents are responsible to train and educate their kids,
right?
Whether you delegate part of it or not. That's really important. And let me just add the other thing. We never took, despite the fact that it could have been helpful, certainly would have been helpful. We never took tax dollars in all of those years educating our kids. Was it easy? No.
Right.
We had to be.
It was a sacrifice for sure.
Exactly. So I would encourage people to be creative, to seek wisdom from other people, and find out how this all happens. Because there's millions of homeschool kids in the country.
Right.
And I would say, just a rough estimate, I would say there's 45,000 kids in Oregon homeschooling.
Wow.
Anyway, that's it's not impossible to do. And, if God's called you to do what you need to do, go do it. There'll be a way.
He'll give you the tools.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think, too, you look at, when we kind of went through the worldwide pandemic and all of a sudden, schools were shut down and we utilized the tools of distance learning, and parents all of a sudden were in the classroom more or less with their kids and watching what was being taught. I think you saw a lot of parents' eyes open. Mm-hmm. And I believe there was a significant bump in moms and dads saying, oh my goodness, little Johnny's learning or Susie's learning some things that maybe we don't quite agree with and don't quite align with our values. Or they just saw that little Susie and Johnny just weren't learning,
right, and
decided that, you know what, I'm their first teacher anyway, and from birth till 4, 5, 6, whenever in theory you send your kid to school, you're still that first teacher. You're the teacher that teaches your children all of the things that they need to know before they walk in that kindergarten door. But talk a little bit about the bump, I think, in the homeschooling as a result of the pandemic.
Well, the pandemic, we were pretty consistently 2 to 3% for many years of the total school-age population. I believe it's somewhere around 10 at this point, and it's fluctuated some with the end of the COVID crisis and all of that.
Right.
But so many have stayed with it. Some have gone back to public schools for whatever reasons, their perceived economic problems or whatever. So the movement continues to grow. People are seeing great results, obviously academically, but there's so much more to this whole thing than academics. And I'm still excited about it after all these years, and I believe that political change, political benefit, actually exercising our republic and our Constitution will come through culture change.
Right.
We need to take our children back.
Right.
So,
well, that's a great message.
I'm not bashful about that.
No, not at all. That's a great message. Yeah, train the child in the way you should go, and that is clearly a biblical mandate.
Yeah.
So, and it's great to see families that are accepting that challenge just straight up. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, we've got a lot to do to right the ship of state, so to speak, here in the state of Oregon. And homeschool families are right at the tip of the spear as we do that. I know my own political experience that during campaign season, there's little doubt that when homeschool families are asked to come help, they're right there helping, knocking on doors, help put up the lawn signs and being the campaign troops that are necessary to win campaigns. And so that's been true, in my holy smokes 30 plus years in public service now. So, and I expect it will continue.
I remember a time several of my kids and I, your dad was doing a parade up in
Hillsborough.
It may have been St. Paul.
Oh, that's right, because when he represented the Yamhill County and
so he sent me a note. Yeah, he sent me a note and said, "Hey, do you know any homeschool families that want to go?" Well, some of us went and we had a great time.
Yeah.
But remember, those kind of experiences, that is education. That's learning about politics. It's learning about being involved civically, which homeschoolers have a much higher percentage than public school and private school kids in terms of political involvement.
Yeah.
But I remember doing the parade with your dad, and anyway, it was always fun to walk with him because he had the biggest smile. So,
yeah, that's fun to remember those times. So, I had the distinct honor and privilege of one, following in my dad's footsteps, and then ultimately serving with him. We were the first father and son elected to the Oregon Senate together in the same election. So, it was quite, for me personally, just to have the opportunity to do that with my dad. It's pretty special. So,
absolutely.
As we wrap up here, any kind of closing comments that you would have?
Well, I found one thing I specifically wanted to say today, and you can take it however you want to take it. There are 1,000 flavors. It's not 31 flavors. There's 1,000 flavors of what people call education today. And I would say the first thing you need to do, if you decide that you're going to do something different with education, you need to go through and separate all of these choices into taxpayer funded, your neighbor paying for your children, and non-tax funded options for education. And I like to, so the separation between the real difference is tax funded or not.
Right.
If it's tax funded, it should be managed, it should be fully accountable to the taxpayers and the government. I don't want to be for my children.
Right.
So,
but the government funds, the government runs.
Right. Exactly. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. There's always a little. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's understanding that.
Yeah. The homeschool families, especially the organization you're most associated with, they don't want government help. They don't want government. Right. They don't want a tax credit. You're not looking for vouchers.
Right.
You're not looking for anything from the government. You just want the government to leave you alone, to do the job that God's called you to do in educating your family. And that's separate from, there's a movement out there for vouchers. There's movement to expand school choice. Right. Completely different conversation. Conversations that I do support.
Right.
But it's different than homeschool families that just say, you know what, we're gonna do the job that God's called us to do, and government, I really don't need your involvement, and I don't want it.
That's right.
I don't want your tax money. We can handle this on our own. God's given us the tools to do it, and we intend to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
The despite, I think, very sincere efforts, that the school choice discussion, the presentation of the current school choice movement is a little bit disingenuous, because it implies that we do not have school choice in Oregon today.
Right.
And we do have school choice.
Sure.
It's all about tax money.
Yeah.
That's what the whole modern school choice movement is about.
Yeah.
And you can take that for whatever you want to do it. I don't want the tax.
Right.
I don't want the accountability to the government for education.
Yeah, I mean, parents all the time choose to either homeschool their children, and they choose to send their children to private school. My wife and I did that, and we didn't. Government didn't help us. We wrote those tuition checks.
Amen.
And we're happy to do it. Our kids turned out really well. We delegated that responsibility to others, and looking at the system that we have of education today in the state, unfortunately, Oregon children are not doing well, and not doing well, especially in the public system.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. And we really, as a policymaker, we've got to figure out how to rescue a generation of kids that are really having a difficult time in the public system. The data speaks for itself. There's no question about that, and I don't believe it's for lack of resources. I mean, we spend an inordinate amount of public tax money on public education in this state. So
I think $6.3 billion per year for K through 12.
Yeah,
I believe that's approximately the number.
I think that's about right. I think they're looking for somewhere over $12 billion for the biennium. So, and those are conversations that are happening in the Capitol, and we will continue to have those, and we do have as a state the responsibility to provide a system of education for the kids in our state. We just need to do it in a way that improves the outcome, and unfortunately today the results aren't that great, and we've got to work at it. So that's not really the crux of our conversation this morning. Those are conversations that are happening down the street. So, Wes, I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and for myself, it's a little bit of a walk down memory lane, and which is always fun. And so we're going to continue to fight for ultimate homeschool freedom in this state. We've got a bill that's been introduced again this session.
HB 2187.
House Bill 2187. It's in the House Committee on Education. I believe Representative Neron is the chair of that committee.
Correct.
If you're watching this at some point, feel free to pick up the phone or send an email to Representative Neron and ask for a hearing.
Right.
And we can get that bill moved. And again, our history, our shared history, our success was bipartisan. It wasn't just Republicans. It wasn't just Democrats. And we worked together on it. Hopefully that we can do that again in the future. So thank you very much.
Yes.
I appreciate the time this
Bruce.
morning. And
appreciate it.
We'll look forward to working together in the future.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Absolutely.